you are well done. You're here. I am here. Dave is also here. This is Terrible Lizards. We are live on the internet. Say hello, Dave.
Hello, Dave.
There you go.
I'm always going to do that.
Yeah, thank you so much. If you are here, do say hello in the best way possible, which of course, look at that. Marzipan Beetle says, rar. William is going for the more sensitive hello.
Well, no, he said hello because it's all capitals.
True. Hello, Dan and John and rar to Jonathan there as well. Do respond to us in the chat, ring bells, like things, do all the things that the internet tells you to do, please, because that's the only way that we get new listeners. Or we have entirely, because this is a zoological, paleontological podcast, science podcast, and we have entirely organic growth because we don't pay for ads, which makes us very special, doesn't it?
Slow
Dave?
growing, yeah.
And slow growing.
Organic growth is that it's slow and creeping. And takes
but look at all of these amazing people who are joining us. So there we go. Oh, am I too loud? Am I a bit loud? Am I too loud, Dave? Am I all right?
Well, in general or now specifically, it's two different questions.
I could be slightly over. Now we have, if you if you have a look, if you haven't joined us on our wonderful Patreon, there's our Patreon. Wonderful patrons have been submitting their questions to us already, so I have got a few lovely questions that we can go to when I find it on the app thing, because I'm bouncing around all over the place like a a presenter. Or Dave could say something while I look.
Good. You're the host. You've got control of all the comments and what you're showing.
I know. I'm trying to find them again. Here they are. Okay. So our patron sent us some questions to start the ball rolling. If you've got a question specifically for Dave, usually, that you can ask me a question. I don't know much about dinosaurs though. So here we have the first question. Hey guys, Tom Holtz. You know that name from Spinosaurus.
And everything else.
But most recently from Spinosaurus stuff. So Tom Holtz posted about a track site, and by this he means footsteps, that apparently got destroyed by people in charge of keeping it safe. How the heck does this happen? And is there any way to fix it? And that's by Katie. So Dave, why did this stuff happen?
Because someone did something stupid is the very short version. So it's a lower Cretaceous track site in somewhere in Utah. I can't remember where exactly. It hasn't been destroyed. It is really quite a big track site, but a large chunk of it has been damaged. People who are on Facebook, particularly people who are on Twitter, you'd have seen lots and lots of comments from various people. Tom's retweeted it. Brian Eng, ENGH, who's an artist who's done a lot of work there, put lots of tweets out about this. My understanding is the short version is the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management in America, who is supposed to run and manage the site. There was a boardwalk, so like a raised wooden thing out over it so you could walk around and see them, but obviously not actually step on them. And they decided to either move or remove this, and without taking a paleontologist with them, which I believe they're legally required to do. In my defense, what I know about the exact legalities of what the Bureau of Land Management allowed to do in Utah is tiny. I'm reporting what people have told me, but there's supposedly legal requirements.
You're gossiping, Dave. You're gossiping.
Yeah, furiously.
What you're doing. Yeah.
As a paleontologist on site and didn't have one, and basically the JCB digger, backhoe, whatever you want to call it, that was supposed to go in and move this, drove over the dinosaur tracks to get to the thing to remove it. And mysteriously enough, when you have these things and drive a digger over them, you wreck them. And so a whole bunch of tracks have been at best damaged and at worst destroyed. Some of the best stuff, I believe, hasn't been damaged. Some of the best preserved stuff and some of the most interesting tracks haven't been damaged. Though they themselves are not particularly well preserved to start with, but there's a whole bunch of mess. And there was some big meeting about this during the week, and lots of people sent very angry messages to the BLM, and people were posting these online going, you were supposed to have done this. Why didn't you follow your own procedure? Why didn't you follow this law? Where is the consultant who's supposed to be on site? And it's all just been completely ignored, which generally means that someone knows that they've messed up and is doesn't want to make them dig themselves into any deeper hole than they're already in.
And saying that, remember, all of this is gossip and just what Dave's heard. If you work for these people and
don't sue
Dave
us out
is
of
wrong,
existence.
do not sue us, please, because
Yes.
we have. Well, we do have some money because we do have lovely patrons.
No, we don't.
have
We're
a
broke. We have
patron.
no money at all. But yeah, as I say, this is all stuff that I've seen posted by Brian, Rebecca Hunt Foster, and other paleontologists who are in and around that area and have worked on that stuff. So yeah, it's pretty bad that it's happened. Hopefully it's not going to get any worse. Hopefully some of those tracks are recoverable, and they were at least documented quite well before this, which is a start. But
what were they tracks
pretty
of?
bad. All sorts. It's a site that I don't know very well. I've never been there, and I don't know much about the actual science of it. I know there are theropod tracks. I know there are hadrosaur tracks. I know there were crocodile tracks because people have been posting photos of them. But I really didn't know much about the site at all.
Well, we got a question here which you'll love because it's about your new book. And this is about your old book, I think. It says, question for Dave. When I tried to get his book, they said it didn't ship to Australia. Is there a way to get it to Australia? Can they write you an email, Dave, and sort it out?
They can. The problem is, obviously, I have no control over this. It's down to the publishers and whatever the distribution network is. Both the Tyrannosaur book and the upcoming next book are available as ebooks. So I can't believe you can't get them as an ebook online. In terms of shipping, I just don't know. The other possibility might be to try something like ABE Books, who are a second-hand book dealers, but they ship worldwide. So there may well be second-hand copies of my book knocking around. You're probably going to pay quite a bit of shipping, but
yeah,
it would be over.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry. I know I periodically get messages like this, and I'm afraid I have no control over shipping my book abroad. So
this is a wonderful question. Because it imagines, right? Hi, both. Love the podcast. Ovs. Thank you. This is from Alan. If dinosaurs and pterosaurs share a common ancestor and you found a contender, what would you hope it looked like? And I'm hoping it had a name badge.
Yes. It would look a lot like dinosauromorphs, or even dinosauriforms. So as we've talked about before, you've got these various succession of very dinosaur-like but not quite dinosaur things, which look a lot like early dinosaurs like Coelophysis and stuff like that. So they're small, they're bipeds, they've got small heads with long necks and long tails, relatively long arms. They're all carnivores. And the pterosaurs ultimately branched off from something very, very close indeed to the early dinosauromorphs, and therefore that common ancestor would have been knocking around in that cluster of taxa, and it would have looked just like all the others. It's just that pterosaurs are enormously derived and so have changed enormously since then. I guess the question is kind of asking, would it look like half Eudimorphodon and half Coelophysis? And no, it wouldn't. It would look like an early dinosaur. It's just the pterosaurs have changed madly. In the same way that the ancestors of whales ultimately goes back to a thing called mesonychids, which are kind of wolf-like things, but they're actually derived from the artiodactyls. So they're within hippos and antelope and giraffe and camel. So it's like, well, what would the ancestor of antelopes and whales look like? Well, it would be an antelope, because that's basically what it was. It's just that the whales are really weird and the antelopes are still antelope. Like, it's not half whale. And then they each went their separate ways.
As we're on flappy things, I think we've got a question about pterosaurs, which is from Thomas. It says, why and how did Quetzalcoatlus and the Azhdarchids get so big as flying animals? Birds, condors, albatrosses, bustards, hat seagulls seem to be limited to about 20 kilos with a 3.5 meter wingspan. But these guys were 3 times wider, maybe 10 times heavier. They were literally the size of Spitfires.
Well, they're 100 times heavier. I mean, 250 to 350 kilos. So first of all, there were bigger birds than that. So Haas eagle is extinct, but was pretty big New Zealand eagle. But we've got things like teratons, which were knocking around. And those are, I think, in the kind of 4, maybe even 5 meter wingspan range. So they're quite a lot bigger than those other birds that we just listed. The short version with pterosaurs is obviously we don't exactly know. There can be all kinds of factors going on, which can be very hard to work out.
Like what? What, the mountains were bigger? No, the mountains would have been smaller.
But you could get interesting things like I don't know, the very evolutionary pressure to do it. It could be that big ash darkids are feeding partly on sauropod carcasses, for example. I don't think they were, but let's just say, for example, that's part of what triggered it. The fact that you've got those giant bodies that you could feed on might then push something ecological. Whereas in the biggest things we've got are usually elephants that are a fraction of that size. So you don't have the same food, whatever. I don't think that's the case. I'm just saying there's these odd things that you can't necessarily pick up functionally.
All I've heard here, guys, is that Quetzalcoatlus
is eating
hunted.
Sauropods. Yeah.
Hunted sauropods. That's what I'm hearing in my head. They hunted them
because that's what
all
your
they
head
did
does.
Get their heads. They flapped around their heads and blinded them. They tripped and they fell over, and their fragile skulls exploded on impact. And then they ate the entire thing. That's science.
Yes.
That is.
So that stuff we don't know. What we do know is pterosaurs seem to generally be more pneumatic, so they are lighter for their size than you would imagine. Now, obviously, they're still pushing very heavy weights, but it means that you can actually get more animal, in particular, more lift, and you can become basically more efficient at large size. And the other thing is this, the quad launch thing, the fact that birds basically jump into the air with their back legs and then flap their wings to get going. And so all that leg muscle is just there to get them into the ground. They do run around on them as well, of course, but they have actually a bunch of extra leg muscle, which is just to jump, to launch, to fly.
Which is silly.
Yeah, which is stupid. Pterosaurs don't have that. They jump using their forelegs, their wings, which basically have all the flight muscle on them. So they're not then carrying around this giant amount of redundant extra weight at the back, which is a pretty bad way of arranging things. The other thing I'd suspect is actually feathers are part of the problem. Bigger and bigger birds have more and more and more feathers. Swans are something like 25 to 30% feather by weight. If you get a swan, you plucked all its feathers off, it'd be 2/3 swan and 1/3 feathers. And that goes up and up and up and up and up. And so, of course, as you get bigger and bigger and bigger, you're sticking on more and more weight just to build your wings. And pterosaurs don't really have that when they've got these very pneumatic wing finger and then just a thin flap of skin. That skin is going to get bigger and heavier as they get bigger, but it's not going to get disproportionately heavier in the way that feathers do. So that, I personally suspect, is limiting big size for birds as well.
First of all, I'm going to say content to our listeners and watchers, obviously. Please don't pluck a swan don't do that. Leave them be. Also, what about, because I was going to say, well, why haven't birds evolved without flight feathers? Because we had dinosaurs who we think might have flown, like Scansoriopterigids, which had why aren't there dinosaurs why, Dave? Why?
Was there a question? You said, why didn't they? And then never actually finished.
Well, why are birds so reliant on feathers when other dinosaurs have developed, and outside pterosaurs have developed similar bat-like strategies?
Well, because evolution is not very good at going back on something. And so we've got our evolution episode coming up, though. I'm not sure we talk about this then. But you get locked into pathways. Evolution doesn't plan ahead. Evolution isn't trying to get anywhere. So if feathers are useful right now for gliding, you will grow feathers. And if they keep being useful, you will keep growing them. And then if it suddenly turns out that they're not very good at that, you might get rid of them. But you're not just going to bump yourself down the evolutionary pathways and then jump into something more exciting. You're going to go extinct as soon as you become non-functional and don't work properly. So basically things get trapped into doing weird things in the same way that we haven't got rid of our tail yet, for example. We still got an appendix and the recurrent laryngeal nerve being the classic one.
Is that the one that loops around your heart, or is that a different
Yeah.
Yeah, that's silly. Okay, this is appropriate. We do have an evolutionary question, but I think we should definitely do one on convergent evolution because it really freaks me out.
I think that would take about 10 minutes and wouldn't fill an episode.
Well, we could do it. We could do it. Anyway. I want to talk about blue tits and bottle tops because that is. It's true, right? Okay,
that's not convergent evolution, though.
Well, no, it's true. It's not convergent evolution, but it's things.
You can talk about it if you want, but
it's things happening at the same time, coincidentally.
Yes, that's not convergent evolution.
No. What about sheep rolling across?
No, this is independent acquisition of features in common populations. Anyway,
enough of that. Okay. So let's have a look. See people going. Oh, look, people. I like people. So there we go. There's Darren again. Okay, so now Dave, right, was at like a proper place, like the Royal Institution, giving a lecture about spinosaurs. When's that going to be out, Dave? Do we know? In a couple of months?
They didn't. They said in a couple of months, so I don't know when. In the meantime,
I said we should record it illegally, and Dave said no.
Yeah, because I'm lovely. In the meantime, in about 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. I did a video for the Insider a couple of weeks back, and that's supposed to be out on, I think, the 22nd of February.
We will share it to all the things, so you won't miss it. But that's Dave ruining films for everybody, so that's good.
The fun bit of my job is pointing out.
Exactly. The reason, though, I mentioned the RI, the Royal Institution, is there were a lot of small people who haven't lived many children, so they were there, and a common question you were getting was one which is a bit like this. Which is, what is the best route to a career in paleontology? Asking for a 12-year-old. So what would you tell a 12-year-old other than do biology?
Do biology, and
GCSE.
the bit that I usually don't like to hear is do maths. I'm terrible at maths. I didn't do A-level maths. That's not quite true. I did one module and I failed it. It's the only exam I think I've ever failed in my life.
It's hard though. Was
module 1 of pure maths, disaster. But if there's anything that's held me back in my career, it's my inability to do maths and statistics. It's been a genuinely massive deficit. And these days, computer programming as well. And I know there's a lot of that going on in schools, which I didn't have, but still. Biology, obviously, but if you can, statistics in particular and programming, it will be such an advantage. And then the other thing I'd say is just read stuff and just discover and learn stuff and try. As having this discussion online because someone was, who was it? Oh, it was Jules Howard for his next book was asking biologists what do you think is a good tip? And ended up getting into a massive argument with a friend of mine over this. But I said understanding stuff is more important than learning facts. And I think a lot of people think that, because I get this quite regularly, and usually for even younger people, it's like, oh, well, my 6-year-old can name every dinosaur in his book, and that's really great. And it's like, it is really great, but it's really not very helpful. I forget dinosaur names all the time. I can look them up. I can look facts up very easily and check them because all that information is available. Knowing what to check and knowing what it means and how to interpret it and the implications for that and how I could study it, that's the bit that's important,
That's what you get listening to the podcast. You see, that's why this podcast is important. You get that for that reason. Can I also add, Dave, I did a 3-hour paper for my finals in statistics, and I had to do a multivariate statistical program in Fortran as part of my final year. So thanks very much. That's how I got my
job. How did that go?
Hey, I got a first in the mud and the causes of mud. So shut up. So anyway, let's so yes, best thing to do if you want to work with dinosaurs as well, you don't actually have to be a paleontologist. You can go into other things. You can become a software engineer who builds models for paleontologists.
Yeah,
you could,
I know
be a
people,
publisher of paleontology.
Yeah, I know people who've got degrees like engineering and history who've gone on to academic careers in biology and paleo. Obviously, biology and geology are the normal routes in, but the idea that if you haven't done biology or geology or paleontology as your undergraduate or your master's, you failed and you've got no chance is absolutely not true at all.
Fortunately,
there's
there
a
we
good
go.
start. Well, then they have a good start.
Exactly. So I like this question, and I think if you haven't listened to our sauropods episode, the Plodocus episode, it's worth asking for other people. Did sauropods lay eggs, have nests, and were caring parents? It seems weird because they were so big. So
lay eggs, yes. We've got lots of sauropod nests. We've got lots of sauropod eggs. We've got eggs with embryos inside them. There was a brief idea in the kind of 70s and 80s that they might give birth to live young. And there's a weird painting, it's pastel, by the legendary artist Doug Henderson of a sauropod giving birth, which came out at that time. But no, they were all egg layers as far as we know. Caring parents, so we've definitely said before that, the kind of default for dinosaurs is pre and post hatching parental care, because that's what we see to be almost universal in crocodiles and birds. But that doesn't mean that it truly was universal. Some groups probably lost this at some point. I would say sauropods are probably pretty big candidates for that. We've got things like these egg or nest fields of eggs in India in particular, where there's just, that's the one.
There you go. I found it.
Well done. You can just see, eggshell, literally, as far as the eye can see. If you take a step, you'll stand on eggshells. And they appear to have been using this is on the slopes of a volcano, and they're literally using the heat of the volcano to incubate their eggs. And it looks like a turtle nesting site to me, at least, in that there's just so many eggs everywhere. And there's not gaps between them or spaces that you see with things like hadrosaur nests and stuff like this. And I can't easily imagine that the sauropods are actually hanging around in numbers, waiting for those to hatch. They'd end up crushing their own eggs or each other's. They're on a volcanic field of ash. There's nothing to eat. The eggs would take weeks, if not months, to incubate. What are they going to do? I think they're probably abandoning them. And that kind of makes sense for really big animals that might be producing hundreds of relatively small eggs, to just go for this strategy of huge numbers of offspring with no care. Basically do the fish strategy rather than the kind of mammally bird strategy. So I'm sure not all sauropods would have done this, but I think on average sauropods are a pretty good candidate for dinosaurs that didn't particularly look after their young.
Okay, moving on. I'm going to do a random question from our patrons. What is the latest thinking of flight capabilities of baby pterosaurs? Also, if I were a particular pterosaur twitcher in, let's say, the late Cretaceous, where would I have gone to observe the best and the most abundant pterosaur action? So is there an equivalent of a wetlands sort of area where you go to watch your...
So let's start with the baby pterosaurs. So baby pterosaurs could fly. I think almost everyone is happy with that idea. I had a paper out last year or the year before arguing for basically what we call hyper-precocial flight. In other words, hours, but certainly days, a week at the outside from hatching, they are flying. I'm not the first person, and there's a group of us, but we're not the first people to say that. We're not the only people to say that. Darren Naish, Liz Martin Silverstone, and Mark Whidden had a paper saying something very similar that came out about 6 months after ours. We were both working to papers that, Chris Bennett in 1995, Dave Unwin going back to about 2003 had said similar things. I think everyone is quite happy with the idea that the average pterosaur, again, sure there's some exceptions, were flying pretty much straight out of the egg. Where to go in the late Cretaceous? The late Cretaceous record for pterosaurs mostly isn't great, because at this time we've got a lot of big weird stuff like Ashtarkids, Quetzalcoatlus, hanging around in environments where they don't preserve very well. So we don't tend to find that many of them. I can never remember quite how old Pteranodon is, because I would say Pteranodon is inverted commas middle Cretaceous. Formerly, the Cretaceous is only split into the early and late, or lower and upper.
He just plucks late Cretaceous, so I think you could go for middle Cretaceous.
Pteranodon, I never remember quite which side of the border it sits, because it's somewhere around that split point. But Pteranodon is the one. So the Niobrara chalk, which is now Kansas, modern US, which used to be basically an inland sea, we have about 1,100, 1,200 specimens of Pteranodon. That's getting on for more than all other pterosaurs combined. So take a boat out to the middle of Kansas because you're going to find them. I mean, they're just everywhere. Huge numbers. And of course, Pteranodons are really cool. Pterosaur, they're really nice and big, and they're doing interesting things. And you got some nice mosasaurs and giant sharks and all kinds of other stuff knocking around there as well.
I've got another sort of paleontology-ist question, which is from Concrete Toy. Hi, Izzy and Dave. Dave, how important is it to have a dedicated paleontology department in higher education? I found recently that in my country there are none, and geologists and biologists become paleontologists.
Yes.
It's a limit, I think, to the amount of things.
So on the one hand, it may not be that important. I mean, I can't think of a dedicated paleontology department in the UK. We've got a couple of earth sciences departments or biology departments which have very large numbers of paleontologists. So University College London is one, Oxford is one, Bristol is one, Portsmouth is one. I'm really kind of running out at that point. But even it's still like half a department, and obviously earth sciences departments are not usually very big compared to medicine or law or other big ones. So it's certainly been no enormous impediment to research in the UK or most of Europe or even North America. I can't think of too many in the States. These places usually in museums. There is obviously synergy from bringing together people who work together on similar things. I see it in my own biology department. Though I've collaborated with 5 or 6 different people in a department where I'm the only paleontologist, I'm bringing them into my work because they've got skills and knowledge and stuff that we can use like this. It obviously helps, but I think it's, even if you had a dedicated paleontology department, or you think of those ones that I've named, most of them don't have too many people working on similar things. I think when people think, imagine if we had like a proper paleontology department with like 15 paleontologists. Yeah, with 15 or 20 people in. Well, remember, paleo is not just dinosaurs. You've got everything from hominids to early life origins 4 billion years ago. You've got all these different continents. You've got almost infinite numbers of species or even, groups. You can work on mammals, you can work on corals,
humans,
you can work on plants. Yeah. All these different stuff. And again, there's different overlapping or non-overlapping techniques. I could probably pick quite carefully and find you 20 researchers, all of whom worked on a different region of Earth and a different group of organisms and used different methodologies or interested in different aspects of their biology. And nothing of what they did would intersect with each other whatsoever. So it wouldn't be any much difference to me being dumped in a biology department where no one else works on anything extinct. So it would help. I suspect it would improve research. It would improve training, etc. But paleo's doing all right. And in the UK, at least, which is, I think it's fair to say, one of the premier countries for paleontological research in the world, we've never had anything like that. And it's never really held us back. So I don't think it's that important. And that line of, most paleontologists have come through biology or geology. Again, they always have. This has been the state for 150, 200 years. That's what paleontologists are. They are usually biologists who learn some rocks, me, and I know almost no rocks, or they're geologists who've learned some biology. That's what it is, because it's an interaction of the two fields.
Right, let's have a look and see another Patreon question. Oh, that's a good question. It's from JT. Given that it's been out for a few months now, what is the reaction to the Isle of Wight hell heron paper? Hell heron crocodile face. Yeah. What's it been like? Have you been dissed, Dave? Have you been driven out by the community?
Several people, including at least one academic, has said, this is all nonsense and rubbish. You got it all wrong, whilst citing all the arguments that we had explained at considerable length in the paper.
Good.
So it's like, well... as I've always tried to say, maybe we are completely wrong, but we've tried to lay out all our arguments clearly. We knew what all the criticism was going to be, and all the criticism that I've seen is things that we already addressed in the paper. And maybe we are still wrong. Maybe we hadn't addressed those criticisms as well as we could. We could have more or better arguments and yada, 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 yada. But the main thing I've seen is, these can't possibly be two species living together and interacting. There's no eco-space competition, and they're too similar to be considered different species. It's like, well, we listed all the differences. We've got as many or more differences for these two as we do for any other Spinosaurs. So either you're judging Spinosaurs differently and you need to change all the taxonomy, or ours are fine. And B, we talk considerably about the ecological adaptations and ecological separation, and pointed out that this is entirely normal.
And if you want
I'm not very convinced with the arguments that we're wrong.
Well, that's because you're right, Dave. That's why. There you go. And if you want to find out more about those arguments, we did actually have like the main name on the paper, and like how many people were there? There was two others and us. There's too many.
Well, we had Darren and the lead author Chris Barker, but there's about 12 authors on the paper. There's a lot of people.
Exactly. Anyway, so if you want to listen to that is Series 5, Episode 1 of our lovely podcast, Terrible Lizards, which is free for you to listen to anytime you like. And we can go into the fact that we've got like so many different types of Spinosaur living in Britain, which is really amazing. So this is, I think, quite a nice, and let's just I don't know if you know the answer to this question, so I'm going to ask it anyway. So here is Gutsa 1. Is ground penetrating radar used to find fossils buried underground? Have you ever used a radar?
No.
To find
no. It basically, it doesn't work.
Because it's rock from rock, isn't it?
So that whole thing at the very start of the original Jurassic Park film, they go donk and it brings it up on the screen, doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is all this ground penetrating radar equivalent stuff is looking for differences in density. And that's great when you're trying to find a pocket of oil or a pocket of a different kind of rock that might contain oil or gas or whatever it is that you're looking for. It's terrible when what you want to find is a fossil that's basically made out of the same type of rock that it's sitting in and the rock that it's sitting in. The densities are basically identical, so it basically doesn't work. And even if it did work, you're left with two problems. One, if you find something right on the surface where you can easily dig it up, we could probably have found that through the normal mechanism of walking around looking for bones on the surface. And two, if it's deep underground, it would be probably prohibitively difficult and expensive to dig a really big deep hole down to a fossil. You'd want to wait a couple of centuries for everything to erode to get to it, in which case, what's the point of having found it?
A couple of centuries, you can just go down and get it.
So, yeah.
Jeff Bezos is like taking apart bridges to get a boat out. Who cares about that? We could disintegrate entire mountains to get out.
So, people have tried using it. Doesn't really work. They've tried doing other things like looking for radioactivity, because bones because they're porous, they tend to suck up certain isotopes. And so bones can be radioactive and more radioactive than the background rocks. People try using that. It sort of works-ish, but only for very big bones that are very radioactive and, again, right near the surface. So even that doesn't do a lot either. We've got all this, just to finish, but all this technology stuff, we're in the same problem that paleontology doesn't have any money, and all these things are extremely expensive, and it is infinitely cheaper to hire people or get volunteers to walk around and find stuff than lug a giant, expensive, heavy piece of equipment out into the desert and a generator and try and run it and move it around and keep it running to maybe find something.
I think that's the only answer.
I've been trying, Naren. I having a conversation with a guy the other day about doing a documentary.
A billionaire?
No, but a possible documentary about private ownership of fossils and other stuff. This is one of the things I made. Is like, you do get these art guys who buy a Van Gogh or buy a Dali or a Picasso and then just give it to the museum or donate, a wing to a museum to put these in. You don't get that for dinosaurs. We know there are billionaires buying dinosaurs, but most of them aren't then giving $10 million to a museum and the fossil afterwards.
I'm gonna get you to answer this question
I
because
mean, if
you
you got
know
Bill
all
Gates'
about.
number, that'd be great.
Well, exactly. If anybody wants to, or in fact, you could always, if you want to, just donate to us through Terrible Lizards. We don't do any actual. Well, Dave does paleontological research, but that's not what that funds. It just funds our educational podcast. Thank you very much. So yeah, this I thought was a really cool question because. Did pterosaurs have lungs like a bird, or were they similar to mammals? Because can you just explain how bird lungs and mammal lungs are different? Because I find that's fascinating. Because I do.
So birds and almost certainly dinosaurs and almost certainly pterosaurs and at least some crocodiles and even some lizards have basically what we'd say is they've got a circular lung effectively. So what happens with us is we breathe in, the air comes down your trachea, your lungs inflate, they then squeeze back down, deflate, and the air comes back up. So pretty much any given particle of air, I know obviously air isn't particles, but takes the exact same pathway. And that's not what these are doing. So okay, they have their air sac systems and their lungs, and ignore all of that because it doesn't exactly matter this. But that's the animation I use in my lectures. Whereas what they do is they come, and you can see that with the bird animation at the bottom. So you see it's coming in down the trachea, it's going to the back bit, which is then going to yellow. So that's one air sac system, then goes through the lungs, then it goes into the other air sac, and then it goes back out the trachea. So it's in a loop. Yes, it does go up and down the same bit, but once it's in the lung and air sac system, it goes from A to B to C and out again. Whereas that's really not what we do.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And yeah, that's what all birds do. We've got good reason to think that's what all dinosaurs did, or at least again the default. Part of the reason we think that's the default is we know that crocodiles are doing something similar, or at least can do something similar. And pterosaurs would probably need to, because this is actually a more efficient way of transmitting oxygen than our lungs.
But why wouldn't we be the best at something?
Well, but also it's one of those weird trade-off things. So we have red blood cells that don't have a nucleus in them. So our red blood cells carry more oxygen, whereas reptiles still have a nucleus. So they're better at oxygen exchange from their lungs to their blood, but their blood is less good than ours at carrying oxygen around.
Because ours got sort of like little discs, aren't they? Which are so they got maximum surface area.
Yeah, theirs do too. It's just that some of the space is taken up by the nucleus, so they're not quite as good.
Silly birds.
But it's this thing. Evolution finds something that works, which is not the same as the best way of doing something. Or we both have the same lung structure and we both have the same red blood cell.
And it's a way that you can see that is it's got something to do with the fact that they're so pneumatic, and that's partly the air sacs in the body.
Well, no, because lizards are non-pneumatic, and we know that at least some of the monitor lizards are doing the same thing. And again, the same is true of crocodiles. Their lungs appeared to be, I was going to say wired up, it's not quite the right, plumbed together to do the same thing. It's just that the pneumaticity is an extension of this. And again, the kind of pneumaticity thing, it's a slight exaggeration, isn't quite the right word, but like almost everything's pneumatic. We're pneumatic.
I'm very burpy. Burpy.
It's you've got sinuses. You've got a giant cavity behind your nose and under your eyes that you could pretty much fit your fist into. Well, right, but right up inside, there's a giant hole in your head. It is an internal pneumatic cavity in the skull, the bony tissue. We have something akin to what dinosaurs and birds and pterosaurs have. It's just that they've done the other bones and we've never got further than that bit. But it's not as alien as it looks, because other things have this too.
Now, I think, because basically, guys, we are so hardworking for you, right, that after this, we're going to go and do an interview with the guest for the upcoming series.
I was going to say, what time is that? 9?
That is at 9. We're fine.
Okay, we've got a bit, yeah.
And also, he's probably watching anyway. But I thought that you'd like to answer this question, because I think this is dead exciting, and we will be doing an episode on this, which is, it's great to catch us on live. Thanks, Konstantin. Could you please tell us a bit about Dave's upcoming book? Because he's so looking forward to it. So Dave's got a book coming out in March. Isn't that right, Dave?
March 22nd, because someone else asked. very early on when's it coming out. So it's coming out March 22nd in the UK at least. I believe it's coming out at the same time in America, but I don't know. We delayed the UK publication to link in with the US publication, but the Americans just sent me their draft copy of the cover only this week, which makes me think they haven't printed it yet, which is therefore getting a bit tight for time. So we'll find it. It will be out in America at the bare minimum shortly after it will be out in the UK. Europe, I assume, is the same as the UK. Other people outside of that, I'm afraid I don't know. It is called The Future of Dinosaurs. In North America, it's not going to be called that. It's going to be called How Fast Did T-Rex Run?
He's not angry about that at all, because...
Rubbish title.
Because every dinosaur fan's going to go, T-Rex can't run. T-Rex can't run.
But it's also harder to promote your book when it's got two different titles for your two different main audiences.
Yeah, this is true.
And they're coming out probably at slightly different times as well. But anyway, the book is...
I was trying to do that, but it's not working. Hang on. No, that's just me. That's just me.
Yeah,
Ignore
so
me. Sorry.
The US cover is going to look totally different as well. It's not just got a different title; it's got a totally different cover. But
we'll promo it. It'll be fine. We'll let you know.
The short version of the book is it's about things we don't know. So obviously for every section, so there's ecology and behavior and extinction and origins and anatomy and research and all these different sections. And it's all about, the gaps in our knowledge and things we haven't been able to work out yet and things we might never be able to work out. So,
did they call each other names? Do they have surnames?
Well, but slightly more serious, but things like brain, things like volcanic islands, like some of the weirdest animals that we have now are from volcanic islands. Hawaii, Madagascar, New Zealand, the Comoros, places like the Galapagos, places like this. Volcanic islands are at the worst place in the world for making fossils. And there have obviously been tons of volcanic islands all the way through the Mesozoic. And we basically have zero fossil record for any of them. So if you think the dinosaurs that we know are weird, imagine what was appearing and evolving on these islands, only we don't technically actually know that because, of course, we have no fossils, so we don't know. And we're probably never going to know.
It kind of makes, if you're like a paleo artist and you want to just make up a load of stuff, just make sure you've got a volcano exploding in the background and you can see the sea. Because that way, everything
it will look like every
no
painting
evidence.
from the 70s and 80s.
Exactly. But there'll be no evidence for the creatures there. So you'll be fine. It'll be good. That is. Do we have time for another question, you think, Dave? We've probably got let me have a look at our thing in the right tab, because I'm so good at it. I'm selecting these at random, guys. So let's go for have we had this one? Have I done that one?
Yes.
We have done that one. Have we had this one? Oh, this is, I think, is interesting, which is about how, because learning to see fossils, this is about from Eleanor. Can Dave talk a little bit about learning to see things in fossils? I mean, it's a bit like magic eye, isn't it? I love hearing and reading about discoveries, but when I look at the pictures of fossils, a lot of times they just look like a bunch of jumbled shapes in rock to me. How long does it take to learn to mentally translate them into skeletons or even animals? What does it feel like to learn, and does it make you look at other things differently? So what is it, Dave? How do you do it? How can you magically go?
That is a really great question. I mean, the first thing to say is pictures are usually not terrible, but a lot of the way that you see with any fossil, however well or badly it's preserved, is the ability to move either yourself or the fossil around. You're changing how much of it you're looking at. You can change the light. I'm used to carrying around like torches and little pen lights and things on stands to get the lighting, to get shadows so that different things will highlight and recede. I can blow on a bit that's dusty or brush it away. And for 3D complicated objects, which are, again, often, as you kind of hinted at, broken or not perfectly preserved or partially covered in rock, or the bone and rock are similar colors, this is really, really useful for making those details. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is learning your way around. So, go back to that one you had a second ago. No, scroll back up. No, that one. Yeah. So I'm looking at that, and the first thing I see is a bunch of what look like probably manual phalanges, so finger bones. There's two
It
in the
looks like the
middle
parts of a bicycle.
and one at the bottom. And they stick out like a sore thumb to me because they're really obvious what they are. And they're really obvious what they are because I've looked at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these. And I'm, to be blunt, not a brilliant anatomist. There's loads of bones that I struggle to remember or have to remember exactly what they are or double check the shapes and sizes of things. But those are a really easy one. But I've learnt that through, basically repetition and, it just being buried in my brain and having that pattern recognition. There's a few more of them for exactly what they should look like in almost any orientation or almost any scale for different animals. And photos are really terrible at that, particularly when it's a jumbled mess or when they're broken. And it's hard to say. It's a grind. I've got my notebooks from my PhD and my first couple of postdocs with drawings and notes and sketches and copying things out of books and copying things out of papers and looking at fossils and trying to learn the anatomy and the orientation of things and then the differences between all the different groups. And the best people like this, Ollie Rauhut, who was my German paleontologist, who was my first postdoc supervisor, Ollie would pick up like fragments and go, I remember this one, and it was a broken chunk of bone. And I'm like, it's some random little bit. And he went, no, it's the left astragalus of an allosauroid. And he's like, how on earth have you even got that it's an astragalus, let alone that it's a left one, let alone that it's specifically down to a clade? And he went, well, because that's curved like this, and that you only see here. And though that's broken, it's carrying on at that angle, and that you only see in this group. That makes it an astragalus. And if it's an astragalus, it has to be the left one because this bit is bigger than that end. And so that's got to be the left rather than the right. And then that bit's slightly more rounded, and you only get that in allosaurs. And it's also of about the right age. So the other group, it could be they hadn't evolved for another 20 million years. It's probably not one of them. And that just comes from decades of doing that.
What I suggest you do if you want to practice this at home is to get a load of different types of Lego kits, mix them all up, pluck one out and see if you can identify which kid it's from. That would be if it's a two grayer, it's going to be difficult. But that's it. But yeah, so basically it's experience is the answer to that. So looking at a lot of stuff in rock.
But pretty much. But if you've got the pattern recognition of the shapes of the bones, you know what you're looking for or what you're looking at. And if you've then got the physical thing in front of you and you've got time to look at it and rotate it and work things out, you can put those to use. And yeah, I am extremely sympathetic. That is incredibly hard to do, and you've never done it before. There's bits of fossils, even very well preserved ones, which people are still arguing about exactly what certain bones are.
So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we've got to go and record something for the next upcoming series, which will be starting on Wednesday. I think the trailer is coming out tomorrow, which will amuse Dave because it's taking the mick out of him something chronically, which is brilliant. If you want to catch up with the series, please go to terriblelizards.co.uk. You can find us all about there. You can see loads of episodes to catch up on. But yeah, Series 6 will be starting on Wednesday, assuming that I don't, muck up in somewhere, because I never muck up on the internet. So I've been slick as. It's been amazing.
Apart from the last time we did this when you forgot to log in. It was just me sitting on my own for 30 seconds.
Yeah, it's fine. People like staring blankly into your face of panic. It's good. But yes, thank you so much for saying hello, everybody. And thank you for all the likes and the waves and everything else. We will be doing a questions episode at the end of the series. So if you have more questions, let us know. We might, come and do stuff and online and stuff like that. There's loads of stuff on our Patreon, which is linked from our website. But yeah, Terrible Lizards. So it's patreon.com/Terrible Lizards, and you can find extras there. Other than that, it is time for us to say rawr after 3. Dave, you ready? And it's got to be a good rawr in case there are kids watching and I don't want you to disappoint them. Okay, after 3, 3, 2, 1, rawr.